When you move into that positive mindset, you're accessing part of your brain where you actually can create solutions. You can see other ways, you can see other opportunities. We're all different and we all need help and support and feedback and communication in very different ways. Most great leaders feel that there is psychological safety on their team because they have tried to create it intentionally based on their version. Nobody knows how to lead today. Nobody does. The most seasoned expert leaders do not know how to lead today.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Flow Over Fear. I am excited you're here today. My guest is Jackie Insinger, and she is one of the foremost authorities in neuroscience and positive psychology in business and leadership. And this was a lot of fun. This interview was a ton of fun because we ran the gambit from her beginnings, sitting in a basement in Cambridge while going to Harvard University, the easy path. Where she was making some of the first entertainment-based personality tests and getting the attention of Howard Stern in the New York Times, to building her passion project, which is Spark Brilliance, where she does help companies to implement some of the foundational tools of positive psychology to better improve their leaders' performance and the business performance overall. For over 2 decades, Jackie has focused her life mission on developing Spark Brilliance, a revolutionary approach to leadership and team dynamics that transforms a team's performance, their results, and fulfillment. By leveraging the latest research in neuroscience and positive psychology, Jackie designs simple, actionable strategies that individuals can use right away to spark their team's brilliance. With degrees from Duke and Harvard universities and a certification in neuroscience for business from MIT, Jackie's ideas have been a game changer for thousands of people and businesses worldwide. And her clients have included companies including Nestle, Accenture, the San Francisco 49ers, just to name a few. And her new book, Spark Brilliance, hit #1 on 8 national bestseller lists. And it was featured in Forbes, CEO World, and Fast Company. And Entrepreneur Magazine named it one of the top 8 leadership books for entrepreneurs. So you have to check this book out. It has a lot of gold in it. But these accomplishments pale in comparison to her greatest achievement. She won a breakdance competition in the 4th grade. So please enjoy my wide-ranging conversation with Jackie Insinger. Well, welcome, everybody. I'm really, really glad you're here. My guest is Jackie Insinger, and I'm really excited to speak with her. She has an incredible background, as you know, with degrees from Duke and Harvard, certifications from MIT, and working with dozens of amazing organizations. And Jackie, welcome to the show. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you, Adam. I've been excited to be here for a while now. We've been anticipating this conversation.
Yeah, I know it's been we've had to reschedule a couple of times, but I'm really grateful for your patience. Really glad you're here because I think this is an important conversation around the idea of some of the neuroscience aspects of business and what we don't often talk about in leadership. And I'd love to know, just to kind of get a background. I'd love to kind of get a sense of your history. How did you grow up and decide to, go to Ivy League schools and do all these amazing things in neuroscience and business?
Well, okay. I love the angle on this one. So, I come to this, a lot of business coaches or executive coaches and working with corporations have a business type of background and had been in that environment for a while and said, you know what, I've been in this corporate executive position for a long time and now I'm going to coach others is often a path. My path came very differently. I was always focused on the psychology side of things, always on behavior and relationships and dynamics. And how do you really create more effective and meaningful relationships and communication? Because one of the things that I noticed very, very early is relationships are really messy, right? People are messy, dynamics are messy. And, in terms of who I am at my core, like I grew up very much a people pleaser, right? Somebody who it really mattered to me how people felt, how our interactions were, that I was communicating the way that I intended to. And so I really watched and observed people and their reactions and their responses. And, why did this person react positively and this person didn't, right? Starting as a really little girl with my friends, even just really trying to notice those things and pay attention to those things, partially, right, as a coping mechanism to have things be peaceful and positive, and partly really coming from this place of curiosity. So I've always really had that in me. Didn't know what I was going to do with it, but knew that that was something I really wanted to understand, how people act, react, and interact, and why they do the things they do. So, was high achiever. That kind of thing often comes with the people pleasing one way or another. I don't know, chicken or the egg on that one, but, school really mattered to me. Good grades really mattered to me. Always put in like my best effort to have, high goals. So went to Duke, studied psychology there, and really dove into the cognitive psychology angle of how people think, how they behave, how they interact. And Duke has the angle of a lot of the biological sciences. So psychology really fit into that biological science rather than just a soft science. So really kind of dove into the brain side of things. And then when I went to Harvard, designed a master's in cognitive psychology and interpersonal dynamics, really wanting to understand that why behind the interaction and how do we simplify the messiness for people. And that was really the path that I was diving into. Still didn't know what I was going to do with it. But
so you took an easy path is what you're saying.
I took an easy path.
Right.
However, it was easier for me because what I wanted to do was what I wanted to do, right? I wanted to learn these things that were so deeply interesting to me on so many levels, from the intellectual side, but also from the who I am and really wanting to understand this deeper for my own self and my own relationships. So to me, it was an easier path because I was studying completely what I was passionate about and didn't know what I was going to do with it. That's what made it a little squiggly, but just trusted somehow I would be able to apply this in a way that made sense. And from my grad school program, then went on to write personality tests to uncover human motivation, and wrote about 100 of those as part of a .com, right, at the time, which was a big deal, and really entertainment-based personality tests to understand, how to be seen by other people, how to communicate, what is lighting you up, what is shutting you down. And that was kind of where I started realizing the application of the stuff that I was doing.
That's interesting. So entertainment-based personality test. Can you kind of expand on, I'm curious as to know what that means in particular.
Yeah.
How does that apply?
It's so much fun. So if you remember those quizzes, like back in the day in a magazine, right? All those funny little fun entertainment-based quizzes. So this was a website when websites were new, right? So thinking like 99, 2000, where, the internet was just starting to become a thing. And so a couple guys from Harvard Business School used this idea as a business school project. And we found each other and they said, we want to create a website to uncover human motivation through entertainment-based tests. And then we get to, use this information to understand like what makes things go viral. How do people buy things? How do they purchase? Consumer behavior angles. So I was hired to write all the tests. Had no idea what that was at the time, right? I was a kid graduating from grad school and I was like, that sounds fascinating. So there were 7 of us in Cambridge in a basement, one of whom is extremely famous right now, Mel Robbins, if you've heard of her.
Yeah.
Yep. She was one of us. So it was 7 of us, including Mel Robbins. She had just graduated from her Harvard program. And there's just all of us from these different grad programs that came together in this basement, just 7 of us. And I wrote the test. So the first one I wrote was, what breed of dog are you? And it's still circulating around like Facebook occasionally still. And so we wrote it, we put it on a static web page. And this is January of 2000. So we had no idea, like, well, what happens, right? Like, there it is. And we just kind of like, Next thing you know, 2 weeks later, we get a call from the New York Times and a call from Howard Stern saying like, what are you guys doing? And we're like, I don't know. Meanwhile, no social media, it's AOL email. I think maybe Hotmail was just coming out. It was the most clicked on link in the world.
Wow.
And yep, it settled in on 1 million people taking this test a day. And people were copying and pasting this link from this static webpage into their AOL email and sharing it. And so we soon got a call from this venture capital firm in San Francisco saying, whatever you guys are doing, we want to be a part of it, but we want to watch you. So they moved us out to San Francisco, and, just this small group of us moved out and continued on writing these tests. So I wrote about 100 of them. And it was really the first things that went viral. And my takeaway that leads back to your question is what I learned from this experience, because it was perplexing of why are so many people sending this around? My takeaway was people want to be seen. They want to be understood. They want to say, here's another way to look at me, to understand me. Here's another avatar. Here's the breakfast food I would be. Here's the Friends character I would be. Here's my walk-up song. Whatever the things were, like, this is another way for you to see me and to be understood. And it didn't have to feel hard. Because a lot of times when we think about connection and understanding each other, it feels hard. It feels like we have to go to a place that's challenging or difficult or uncomfortable. And you don't. And so that was my biggest takeaway. And that's when I left to start my own practice.
That's fascinating. I'm so fascinated by that you were on the front end of I mean, digging apart everything that you just put out there. Just the idea that you're on the front end of that entire like social media sharing kind of trend that we started, and it started with email. It started with sharing a link to something, and it almost came full circle because you were talking about how early on you were a people pleaser, and I can certainly relate to that. But it sounds like that almost drove you towards this sense of curiosity, like not just why am I this way, which many people tend to internalize, or like why do I need to please people, or why do I feel this way, but more like why do people behave that way?
Yeah.
And it drove you down this path of curiosity and following your curiosity.
Exactly.
So how did that expand from there? So leaving the basement in Cambridge, Massachusetts, it took you obviously to the world of Silicon Valley. Are you and what path did that take you down in your career, and what rabbit holes did you start down that way with your curiosity?
Yeah. So after that chapter with that company, I met my husband and moved to Denver to be here with him. And I started a private practice then. And what I wanted to do was take all of this learning and really help people learn to have more effective and meaningful relationships by honoring differences and leveraging strengths, and really moving into that world. I studied positive psychology because I default to positive. I default to solutions, to finding reframes, to looking at things like building what's strong instead of just fixing what's wrong. That's kind of my natural state. So I went back to the science of positive psychology to really look at that. And in this practice of helping people create more meaningful and effective relationships by understanding kind of your why, understanding, what is your default lens on the world, and how do we build these bridges to more effectively be in relationship? What I found was a lot of people were like, can you work with my executive team? Can you work with my board? Right? Because we're all trying to figure this out. And there's so much time wasted on misunderstanding, miscommunication, just missing the mark, because we're all wired differently. And of course we are, right? We all have our own experiences and our lenses on the world, but we assume people see things the way we do. So I moved into that world and quickly realized the impact of leaders, because you can shift something, and a positive shift in a leader cascades down and impacts so many people. So the way to have a really great influence and impact is by working with leaders, because so many people are positively impacted in that cascade. So I really moved into that leadership world and kind of made my mark there, almost 20 years ago, really working in that space. And I love it. And working with leaders and teams up at that level has been really, really fun.
That's incredible. Are you and with regard to positive psychology, I think just kind of giving a definition there of what that is. I think you defined it actually pretty perfectly. I never heard this before, but building what's strong instead of fixing what's wrong. So it implies that there's a negative psychology, right? That I guess fixes what's wrong. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Or
Well, the way, and it's not like a negative psychology. It's more the psychology we use traditionally. So for instance, the way that I like to describe positive psychology is really a visual. So if you picture a number line, right, with negative numbers to the left, positive numbers to the right, and 0 in the middle. Zeros are baseline, are normal, right? Traditional psychology is really the study of the dips into the negative numbers and how to get back to 0, right? So how to fix what's broken, how to heal what's wrong. And that is so critical. It is so essential. It is so important. And we have neglected to focus on the whole positive side of the number line, right? Where our potential is. Everything is like, let's get back to normal. We just got to get this back to normal. We have to fix this problem where, our performance is down, and the idea, right? Normal is not a stopping point because the absence of sadness is not happiness. The absence of sickness is not health. The absence of poor performance is not great performance, right? Normal is a baseline where great things start. So yes, we have to dip into the negative numbers, but the intention is we dip there to blow past zero, not to stop at normal. And so that's where I see positive psychology is the way I define it is the science of potential, right? It's this limitless side where all the great stuff begins. And that's where I like to focus. And yes, with clients, we always dip into the negative because that's reality. That's human nature, but to blow past normal.
Yeah. Well, that's, and you see in the world of kind of maybe on the periphery of positive psychology, I'd love to know your thoughts on this. There are a lot of people that are just promoting, mindset shifts, positive thinking, and maybe not coming from the scientific background. We see a lot of obviously scientific work and I guess what I mean by that is people who are highly educated, spending time in the negative, maybe the dips that you're talking about, but maybe not so much in the positive. Is that fair to say?
That people are spending time in the negative side?
I guess more professionals that are professional from the scientific standpoint, like yourself, are spending more time in the dips rather than the positive side. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I find that a lot of people are spending the time to fix what's broken, and that's often, in my experience, when people reach out. A lot of people, when they feel like they're doing well, they don't reach out for help because they're like, yeah, I'm fine. I'm okay now. Like I'm at my baseline. I'm at my normal. There's nothing wrong to reach out, to get support, to get help. And what's interesting is like, that's when there's so much room, right, to do incredible things. So I believe in support all the time, right? I always have a coach, right? It's always great. Yes, we all dip down, and that's maybe more critical need feeling. And like, why stop there? Right. That's where I went back and studied neuroscience for business at MIT, specifically for business. And it's really about optimizing your brain and behavior for success. Like, how do we hack into things? How do we understand the way our brain used to create momentum? To create this virtuous cycle versus a vicious cycle.
Yeah. And as a leader myself, as someone who's running a business, I'm finding, that even when things are good or things look good, there's still that underlying fear there. There's still that negative bias, or where I'm just feeling like something is on the horizon. Is that, are you seeing that en masse, or is that just, is it something that even when things are good, that's why people may be seeking out some more positive psychology, like you're trying to help people with?
Yeah. So there's a lot of, we default to the negative. It's a negativity bias. So our brain will naturally default to negative. And part of the way I look at the positive psychology angle is we just need to balance out the scales a little bit. Bad will always be stronger than good in our brains. So no matter how much we try to shift our focus onto what's good and what's right, we will always know and feel, right? So even those of us who are masters at avoidance, which I can sometimes consider myself to be, we know exactly what we're avoiding. We are very aware that we're avoiding something right now, right? It's not that we don't see it. We know it's there and we're intentionally avoiding something. We can't ignore the bad because that's how our brains are wired. Like sometimes some studies show bad can be 50 times stronger than good in our brain. So for instance, bad health, so much stronger than good health, right? In our mind, the one moment you might lose it on your kid is so much stronger than all the great parenting moments of the week. That one fight with your spouse stands up over over all the great moments, right? There's, you get feedback from your boss. The one thing that's critical, can outweigh all of the good things. That's the one that spins like a bad song in your head when you leave. And there's a study that showed if you give a talk to 50 people and 49 are like, that was incredible. And one person's like, waste of my time, right? Where does your mind go? That one person.
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
And so you think about, that's how we default. So even if we focus and just really try to solely focus on what's good and what's right and what's going well and what we're grateful for and what we appreciate and what we're proud of, all of those things, it's still, the hope is that we're just trying to even it out, right? And that, we're not going to not see this part.
Yeah. Well, and in your work, obviously you have a ton of expertise in this world, and knowing that that's the way that our minds kind of default into that negative space. What are some of the simple starting points to reshift our mindsets, or maybe focus on the things, or should we not focus on those? Should we actually just stay in the negative, but just change our mind about it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And part of it, there's two things. One is understanding what a positive mindset does. So when you understand why it's important versus like, oh, think positive, life is so much sunnier that way. Like, yes, and there's a reason why and what happens when you're in a positive space. So when you're stressed out, your cortisol goes up, and that's your stress hormone. You don't have access to solutions, to possibilities, to rational thinking, to moving through a problem to a successful outcome. So you're essentially like stuck. Nobody wants to stay stuck. So when you understand that when you move into that positive mindset, you're accessing part of your brain where you actually can create solutions, you can see other ways, you can see other opportunities. So we want to have access to that, or else we remain stuck, right? So understanding that why is really important. We also know when you have a positive mindset, your productivity goes up 31%, sales go up 37%, the negative impact of stress goes down 23%. So those are big Harvard Business Review studies. So we know it's really important for outcomes that we learn how to shift, right? So that's really key.
So there's key results in there. Yeah.
Key results in there. Mm-hmm. And as leaders, there's something called emotional contagion. So emotional contagion is, how it sounds, the spontaneous spread of emotion from person to person or through a group. In 33 milliseconds, our brain will read and identify someone's emotions and instantly take them on. As a leader, it's not just the layer below you, but it's also the layer below them. So people you might not have any interaction with at all will take on your mood and your emotion by how you choose to show up in 33 milliseconds. And based on those outcomes that I shared from Harvard Business Review, productivity goes up, sales go up, negative impact of stress goes down. That's for those people also, right? Because you're spreading that. So your bottom line results for your whole company, for your team, for your division, whatever your role is, are impacted by your mindset, how you show up, your outlook, your emotion, your mood in 33 milliseconds. When you click on your camera for that Zoom meeting, when you walk into a room, that spreads and that will create your bottom line results. So I think that why, understanding that why is piece number one. And then there's the how, right? Well, how do you do it? So, I think the one is like, ooh, I am so motivated to do this because this is the easiest, most effective way to change my results, right? So that's part one. Part two, the how. This might sound super fluffy, but it's really not anymore. Gratitude is the number one way to change your brain. And so when we can switch into a mindset of gratitude when we're stressed, our cortisol drops and we're building that pathway to move out of stress and into a place of solution and opportunity into our brain. So it's, it might be like a bumpy, dirt, rocky road at first. So it's like hard to get through. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh, I'm developing these pathways. This is easier. So now when I'm stressed, I now have access that's easier to move into that part of my brain where I can now rationally think through things.
Yeah, that's so helpful and powerful to know with regard to gratitude, because we do hear it a lot. I mean, it almost seems like it's like it's kind of a cliche now, like, just practice gratitude.
Yeah.
But to hear that there's scientific backing behind that, to know that it actually works is helpful. Are there any, I mean, in terms of getting into that gratitude, mm-hmm. Obviously, spending so much time in the negativity, sometimes it gets overwhelming. Sometimes we're challenged to find that. How uh, how can we tap into it in those moments where we're just in so much despair or so much pain or we're challenged in such a deep way? Hey everyone, I interrupt this program to introduce you to a powerful tool that will help you gain clarity on your vision and accelerate your growth and achievement. If you're listening to this show, it is likely that you have an exciting vision for your life. But the problem is that we often get caught up in the day to day. We get distracted. We face uncertainty, overwhelm, and self doubt. And as a result, the gap between where you are and where you want to be seems insurmountable. And that's why I created a framework for how you can turn your vision into strategic, disciplined action that will accelerate your results in the next 90 days. I call it the Vision Reflection Retreat. It is a 2-day solo excursion designed to reignite passion and adventure into your busy life and realign your focus toward your why. This is the very same framework that I use every 90 days to reflect on my own life and my vision and set my goals for the next quarter. And it has been a game changer. And the good news is that I'm giving away this Vision Reflection Retreat guidebook for free when you sign up for my newsletter. Simply go to flowoverfear.com/retreat and download your free guide and enjoy the journey.
Yeah. And I never want to minimize that, right? That feeling. And you don't want to not honor whatever you're feeling because you're feeling something for a reason. It's telling you something, right? And when we're in that space, yes, we want to honor it, but it's very hard to take action when we're in that space. So first, yes, honor it, question it, be curious about it. Why am I feeling this? What is this telling me? Right. So I fully believe in that. In terms of moving into gratitude, I think it's cool to understand that gratitude and fear cannot coexist. You can toggle between them very quickly, but they can't coexist. So an exercise I do with clients, oftentimes when they're feeling stressed or fearful, is in this moment, I have them close their eyes and think of 3 things, very specific things in this moment that you're grateful for, and be as specific as possible. Because if you can just rattle stuff off, you're not actually using your brain. It's like, I'm grateful for my house. I'm grateful for my family. I'm grateful for food, right? Like you're not actually thinking. So what you want to do is effectively move out of that fear state of your brain to think about things you're grateful for. And when you do, what you see is that you moved out of that fear space. And in those moments that you were thinking of things you're grateful for, you weren't fearful anymore. And so giving you that power to understand you actually can control that. You can control your brain where it feels like we can't, right? And the more you can practice that, the more you can build that highway that we're talking about to more quickly and easily move into that place of gratitude. So I think that's a good way to do it. And I have another technique I'll share with you, but I'll pause for a minute in case you want to go into that at all.
Oh, no. I'd love to hear that. The other, because that's super helpful. Because I just hearing you say too that just drives results as well. That we're seeing a higher percentage of productivity or a higher percentage of results through through those practices. This is helpful. So yeah, I'd love to hear that second mechanism too.
The second one, it's funny because I don't talk about this that often, except usually like one-on-one with clients, but it seems really fitting given the content of this podcast specifically is, my mom brought this up to me when I was a kid, and she probably doesn't even remember, but this is something I've recommended to quite a few clients that kind of get stuck in a fear state, is scheduling in a worry hour. And the reason why, it sounds really silly, but I'll tell you why it works. Oftentimes when we're anxious, right, there's like part of our brain that's constantly spinning on this thing, right? And we never actually finish the thought. We never get to a resolution. It's just this almost like this like activation, right? That's spinning, that maybe it's 10% of our brain, maybe it's 20% of our brain, but we're not fully present, and it's taking away from whatever we're doing, and it's constant, right? Do you know that feeling I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's always there. It's always just sitting in the back of your head, and you're almost trying to get rid of it or push it down, and it never goes away. Yeah.
Never goes away. Mm-hmm. And so if you're scheduling time for it, so say like, okay, every day from 12 to 1 or 10 to 11 in the morning, I'm going to have this worry hour. What you're telling your brain is, so say you wake up in the morning and it's happening. You're like, I have time set aside to fully devoted to this thing, to sit with it, to think about it. So I don't need it to spin right now because I have time set aside just for this. So then you go about your time, right? Then you have your worry hour, and it's fully dedicated to all of these things that you're anxious about. And whether you're journaling, whether you're walking and thinking about it, but you're like, I'm fully focused on this and nothing else. And anytime my mind wanders to something else, I'm going to bring it back to these things. And what you start to notice is maybe after the second or third day, there's really nothing new to think about, right? Like, so I'm going to replay this same thing and I'm kind of getting bored of it, right? I've played it from start to finish, right? Usually you don't play it from start to finish. You play it like, oh, I have to figure this out or this thing, or what should I do? But you don't finish it. But now when you're focused on it, you might be like, yeah, there's really only 3 things I can do here, or there's really nothing I can do here. But when you've set aside the time, then you realize I've set aside this whole hour and now the hour's done and it's not taking up space anymore because you've fully focused on this thing and honored this angst, this anxiety. And then the next day you're like, I've got time for it. I'm fully set aside for this. And what you find is it's not taking up your space anymore and you can be fully present.
Oh, I love that idea. That's such a great idea, because I've always been fascinated by this idea of embracing fear, this discomfort that we have, this really uncomfortable feeling of fear or anxiety. And I know I've felt it all throughout my life, and I've always tried to suppress it. But the second that I learned to just embrace it as a feeling that we're going to have as human beings, and maybe I should just visit that space for a while and just sit there. Maybe it will, you'll get some release out of that. And again, just like you said, not minimizing it. That took a lot of therapy, but I love that idea of embracing that feeling and at least taking that hour and actually scheduling it. I've never heard it phrased that way. That's a great idea for that. I love it.
I'm so glad. And then sometimes, you know what? You might be done after 30 minutes and say like, I have 30 minutes. What do I want to do? Right. You
right.
know?
That's great.
Get some time back.
Yeah. I love that. So I want to get into the Spark Brilliance too, because that is your passion project, your company, your book, and there's a framework around that, and specifically you're working with leaders and working along the lines of how to implement a lot of these kinds of things and more positive psychology into the workplace. And I know part of that is it comes into a framework that you have called the Platinum Leadership Framework. Can you kind of touch on what that is and how you walk leaders through that?
Yeah. So Platinum Leadership is a mindset, right? So it's a simple mindset to start how I believe you can be a really extraordinary leader. So the golden rule, right? We all know this: treat others the way we wish to be treated. And I think that works great in large societies, mainly because it tells us what not to do, right? Like, that's off the table. That's obnoxious. That's not okay, right? So it's like these guidelines for inappropriate behavior. In real relationships, I don't believe it works, because who's to say that you want to be treated the way I want to be treated, right? Or that you're going to want feedback the same way I want feedback, right? Or you see support the same way I want support. When you look at your family, right, it becomes very clear, like, we're all different and we all need help and support and feedback and communication in very different ways. And we don't take that to work. And switching to the Platinum rule, which is treat others the way they wish to be treated. And so moving into that understanding, how do you wish to be treated? How do you feel valued? How do you feel best supported? What does a win look like and feel like to you? How do you prefer recognition, right? Like all of those types of things to understand people, to have those meaningful and effective relationships. And as a leader, you have such an opportunity and a privilege to help grow people into their, most successful version of themselves. And you can't do that by assuming they want things the same way you do. And so that's the first mindset shift, is to be an effective leader today. We have to understand our own and each other's platinum, right? So that we can really, really up level and uplift to get results. Soft skills produce hard results, right? So that's where we tap into that Platinum leadership mindset to start.
Yeah, I like that. And it kind of gets into, I was listening to another interview that you had done with someone, and you were talking about psychological safety, and this was an interesting, or I thought it was a more important perspective to share on that subject, because a lot of times when I thought of psychological safety, and I think when others do, they're thinking of maybe creating a space that is safe by these predefined rules. But I think the way that you put it was that you're thinking more about the fact that each person's interpretation of that psychological safety is different, and we have to approach it that way. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, I think, and thank you for sharing that you liked that idea too. I feel like everything is really up to our own perceptions. And when we assume things with best of intentions, we can create an environment that people don't want to stay part of. And that's what we're seeing with the very little tenure that people have in companies, how turnover happens so quickly. And one of the things the Great Resignation taught us was, if I'm not happy, I can just leave. And the reason why most people leave is if they don't feel valued, they don't trust their leader, and they don't feel connected, right? So, or tied to a purpose, right? So these are the reasons why people are leaving today. And as leaders, we can create what we think, but if it's not what they think, data shows people are going to go, right? So we can have the best of intentions and create an environment that people don't want to stay in. So we have to figure out, what does this look like and mean to you? How do you feel valued? What does psychological safety look like and feel like to you? And there are very specific questions to ask to get to understand that. And a lot of it is creating an environment where people feel safe to share what that means to them. And even when I work with leaders, and we have a module that we go through in a cohort of leaders around psychological safety, before we even talk about how to create it for your team, we talk about, what does that look like for you? And a lot of people, they don't know, they just know what it feels like. But then when we dive down into situations where they did not feel psychologically safe, and what was that feeling, and what was the outcome for them in their work, and they realize how terrible that felt, and whether they felt small or shame, or, not confident or an imposter, or whatever the feeling was they felt, or walking on eggshells. I mean, there's so many things that come out of that conversation from these very high level leaders. And then we compare it directly to a situation where they did feel safe. And when we share it, what we learn in the room organically every single time is that these peers of yours have very different versions of what psychological safety looks like and feels like. And that's where it's this expansiveness happens of, oh, wow, I was creating psychological safety for my team based on my version. And most great leaders feel that there is psychological safety on their team because they have tried to create it intentionally based on their version.
Yeah. Wow. How important do you think, and as you're saying that, I think what comes up for me on that is that it feels like defining core values, or being really clear on what the values of an organization are, and being clear on who you want to attract is really important, an important first step or a preliminary step to actually building that in, and then having that opportunity to build that environment for that kind of psychological safety to exist. Is that true, or am I missing a step there?
So yes, and based on my interpretation of what you're saying. One is, culture and values are really important. And a watch out is if you're attracting people only like you. Because if you're building something that, sometimes the culture and values can look like a certain person, right? And warm and friendly and outgoing, or this or that. And so maybe now we're attracting only extroverts who are really comfortable in these types of situations. And so what we don't want to do is limit our cognitive diversity. We have a lot of initiatives around, D&I, and cognitive diversity, I believe, is the most nuanced form of diversity that we need to pay attention to, is how we see the world, right? Our perspectives, our strengths, our skill sets, all of that is so key. And I want to make sure that leaders know that cognitive diversity is so essential for a team's success. Studies even show teams that have more cognitive diversity perform over 100% better than teams that share similar perspectives. So we don't want to confuse those two things. That's the only watch out.
Sure. And can you dig into cognitive diversity a little more and expand on what that means? Is it?
Yeah.
So you said it's how we see the world.
Mm-hmm.
Is that primarily it, or what else does that entail?
Yeah. So it's the inclusion of people with different skill sets, different viewpoints, different perspectives, different strengths. Right.
Gotcha.
So,
okay.
Yeah. So kind of going down into that nuance.
Yeah. And how, in that role, how can we be more inclusive? Knowing that we already have those, or whatever our cultural values in place, how do we start down that path of making sure that we're not falling into the trap of just attracting people that are just like us, or that we're excluding people maybe unintentionally?
I think shifting again into that mindset of how valuable it is to have people with different opinions, different perspectives, different experiences, different ways of seeing things. And once you get into that mindset of, we want to hear all voices. We want to hear, the more that we can build with these different perspectives, the better decisions we'll be able to make. So it's always fun, right? When people think like you, it's like, yeah, we get it. We see eye to eye. We have the same idea of this. And that's awesome. And it can produce some blind spots. So I think understanding that that's a really helpful thing for outcomes will help you kind of draw that in more.
Yeah. What are some of the most surprising things that you've learned, like in working with, as many companies as you have over the last 2 decades or more? What has surprised you the most about some of the things you've learned about leadership and how to provide those tools?
So I think the most surprising thing, well, it's not even surprising, but I think the biggest takeaway right now that I see across the board that maybe would not have been predicted before is that nobody knows how to lead today. Nobody does. The most seasoned expert leaders do not know how to lead today. And it makes sense because nobody has led in these conditions before, right? This is the first time we've got 4 generations actively in the workforce. We've got hybrid and remote environments. We've got mental health and wellness and DE&I initiatives. We've got the highest burnout rate in history, the lowest engagement scores in over a decade, the lowest happiness index, right? We've got this pace of change. We've got AI. And what we know for sure is nothing's slowing down. So nobody knows how to lead today. And I think it is so essential for leaders to be open to understand how do we need to edit and iterate and upgrade and upskill what we're doing in order to keep our employees happy, committed, and thriving. And the lucky thing is we have all the data that tells us exactly what people want. And that's where I spend my time, is looking at what is the data showing us? What do people want in order to stay? And we have access to this. So how do we take this and build the strategies that are simple for leaders to do, that build that bridge so that people do want to work and are happy to show up to work again. And leaders don't have to feel so overwhelmed by the messiness of it all.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that about not knowing how to lead. I mean, it makes me feel very seen,
Oh,
obviously, as a
good.
leader. But yeah, I think that's true of a lot of leaders, especially in those higher level positions. Not speaking for everyone else, but I know that in people that I've talked to, a lot of leaders feel that sense that they're just not enough, or they don't know what the next steps are. They don't belong there. There's not that. But in reality, I mean, I think if you step out of it, leadership, that's all leadership is really stepping forward in front of things that we just don't know yet, and to a lot of uncertainty and a lot of unknowns, and not really knowing what the next step is, but being willing to have the courage to step into the next big decision.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think that that's at the very least healthy for everybody to hear that, to know that that's okay to feel that way, and then to make the decisions anyway based on all of the evidence we have, and then use the tools that you're talking about right here of look at the data, look at what we've learned, look and apply that into the circumstances and the environment that we're in now.
Yes.
I feel like working in a 4th generation family business, I know that the 4th generation rule, that idea that 4 generations are really alive, can be alive at the same time and have influence on this particular world, in those kinds of legacies. And I think in any business, sacred cows begin to develop too, where you just hold on to these ideas or these behaviors or these things, a lot of times based on fear, but it's hard to break those things.
Yeah, it is. And now is the time that we need to, right? It's just what worked 3 years ago does not work today. And we need to have that awareness of how do we shift. Even like the most excellent leaders need to understand that is probably not going to work anymore, right? So how do we tweak and edit what we're doing to bring people along in a positive way, or else we're not going to win anymore, right? We're not going to be able to keep up unless we adapt. And that's the hard part, is a lot of leaders are like, well, I'm good at this. I've done this before, but we're not, if we don't adapt to what the world has changed into and will continue to change into, we're not going to be extraordinary leaders anymore. Right. And so the definition has changed.
Yeah. Wow. That's so powerful. And I want to honor your time, and there's so many directions we could take all of this, because there's just so many levels of curiosity I have around this whole subject. It's so fascinating. But you have you have an accelerator, a leadership accelerator program from the Spark Brilliance. Can you share what that is and how it can help leaders, and really who you're targeting on that program?
Yeah. So it's a leadership accelerator. It's a cohort-based program. It's an immersive program where a group of leaders will go through it. And there's an in-person immersion day at the beginning where we really understand your own authentic leadership style, because we want to understand your platinum first, right? And it's partly too, not just how you lead your team, but how you grow your own leadership in a way that feels aligned with who you are at your core. So that's a lot the first day. And then figuring out, how does that interact and interplay with others, and how do we make that more effective? Following that first day, it's 6 months of 90 minutes a month virtually in your cohort. And that's intentional. What you're doing in between is executing something very, very specific with your direct reports. So we're executing during time we're already spending with our direct reports. We come back together, reflect back, we build the new content with you doing it yourself, and then you go implement with your direct reports. And what's amazing is, after this program, what we've seen, and granted, I put a lot of time into this program. This is my life's work. So it's not just and guess what? There's some great results. I really worked hard on this. We've seen a 58% increase in engagement, a 68% increase in belonging, 56% increase in productivity, 37% decrease in burnout, 53% increase in psych safety. It's been incredible to see that people enjoy it. It doesn't take up a lot of time, and the results are huge. So it's a really cool program for minimal time commitment, maximum ROI, because I've already done the work for you. What do you exactly need to do to create these results in a way that feels good for you and the team? So it's been really, really fun. It's been really fun.
I love that. And there's so much experience and backing behind that, and the cohort model. How valuable have you seen the cohort model in this experience? Because I've been involved in cohorts and mentorship, and it's just been huge to just have other people that are going through it with you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's huge. There's so much intentionality behind everything in this program, and part of that sense of community, right? And having these peers. And again, so much of what the work we do is seeing this perspective shift and the expansiveness of that naturally then integrates into the rest of your work life. And so when you're in a group of peers who are at your same level, that you have respect for, and you see all of these different perspectives, it's such an organic way to start that shift into, oh, well, that person said this. I wonder if this is, applicable to my team, right? So it's just a natural, organic process with this group of peers.
Yeah. It's one of the biggest, one of the primary roles of leaders in organizations is to remove obstacles. Mm-hmm. And you could clearly see that one of the biggest obstacles that we're finding is, that you're helping leaders remove here, is that fear that organically develops out of a lack of attention to this very subject of psychological safety and positive psychology within the organization. So if you can remove that, just imagine the fear that you can alleviate from the organization, and how much better, more productive you can be. You have the data behind that. It's incredible. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I'd love to know, as we kind of wrap up here too, you mentioned at the beginning, during when you were younger, you were a people pleaser, and that kind of drove your curiosity. How has that changed over time, over the course of your career? And, looking at the Jackie now that sits here, how are you still a people pleaser? Do you have you remedied that? What does it look like today?
That's an interesting question. It is always a work in progress for me. I have become better with boundaries around that. And I think that's a big piece to me. from a people pleasing side of caring so much about how people feel, almost like the focus is on, so much more on somebody else's experience of me rather than my experience of me. Right. And so putting some of those boundaries in place has been helpful. So yes, I've become better. And it's always a work in progress for me, like a self reminder of what is more important in the moment and who matters to me most. And, my husband had said something to me a couple of years ago that stuck with me so much. He said, "You receive what you allow." And that was something that really hits me. And I always remind myself of when I feel something where maybe I'm feeling like I'm trying too hard or I care too much about something or something's, pushed too far. I always think I allowed this. I received what I allowed. So how do I shift this in a way that I don't receive this anymore? Right? What's the new boundary? Where do I need to set a line for myself? And so that's something I remind myself of a lot.
That's great. And it's helpful to know too that it's always a work in progress, that there's no perfection is never the end goal, but that's always so helpful to know.
Yeah. I never say practice makes perfect. I always say practice makes progress.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. 100%. If we're moving forward any day, that's the best we could hope for a lot of times.
Absolutely.
Well, I know sparkbrilliance.com is the website where you can find Jackie's work, and the Leadership Accelerator, which you should all go to and check it out. She's also got her book, the book Spark Brilliance, which you can also find on her website or at Amazon and where all the books are sold. And Jackie, where else can people find you?
On LinkedIn or Instagram. I also have a newsletter. If anybody wants to sign up, I send out a weekly email called the Spark Memos every Thursday. So you can sign up for that through my Instagram, whatever the link is by your bio up there. I don't even know what
the link in the bio. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for sharing your wisdom. Again, this is just such a big topic that we could go so deep on, and I hope that we can go further down the road on that sometime in the near future.
I would love it.
Maybe in person, since we're both in Denver. That would be great.
That'd be fun, like a real conversation.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been awesome. And yeah, again, sparkbrilliance.com for everything Jackie's doing. Jackie, thank you for being here. And to everybody else out there, thank you so much for listening. We will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining me today on Flow Over Fear. If you are liking this show, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button. That way you'll be first to know when I drop a new episode, including interviews or trainings or dad jokes. That's right, dad jokes. Add a little levity to your life. And if you liked this episode in particular and you think somebody can get something from it, please share it with a friend. And that way we'll spread the message together. Thanks again for joining me today. We'll see you next time.